Hello plant lovers, it is Matthew in Melbourne, welcoming you back to my channel. Thank you very much for finding me. In case you're new here, I post every Friday about growing orchids here in Melbourne that are either cool, cold or intermediate, and I grow them either inside or outside, or they're out of the pool. So no greenhouse, no grow lights, no humidifiers, just my own basic talent, which is very amateurish. So if that sounds like your growing conditions, do hit subscribe. I post every week and I would love you to come along my orchid growing journey. And so this week, plant lovers, yes, it is a veritable forest of Cymbidiums. And why, I hear you cry? Because it is the first week of spring here in Melbourne in Australia. And I thought, you know what? I'm reviewing everything. I'm doing a spring checkup and now is the time to repot Cymbidium. So I thought, let's do a video, a basic Cymbidium repot video, but look at when is the best time, and then we're going to repot an example. And I've got a few Cymbidiums doing different things, just to confuse the issue a little bit more. Now, I have made a basic care video for Cymbidiums, which I will link above and below. And I made a Cymbidium rescue video, which I will link above and below. But this week, we're just going to look at basic repotting. Now, as I said, it is spring here in Australia, and what we're really talking about is the basic hybrid Cymbidiums that you're going to find just about anywhere in the cooler world, I think. These are the Cymbidiums that you'll find in hardware stores, given as gifts, really common, really beautiful, and here in Australia, given a lot as sort of living flowers, I guess, to people. And it's a very common search for people trying to figure out how to look after them, because they are quite simple once you know how to look after them. But anyway, I made a care video, so we won't really go into that. Suffice to say, though, that the ancestors of most of these Cymbidiums are a mix of various sorts of species Cymbidiums from China, and they are all cooler growing. So the key thing about Cymbidiums is they are an annual sort of cycle. So they put on all their new growth from spring, that pseudobulb matures, that pseudobulb will then produce flower spikes the following winter, and then the late winter, early spring, that flower will be in bloom, and then rinse and repeat, and the whole cycle continues. So spring is when a plant will be putting out its new growths for the new year, and that is a great time, plant lovers, to repot your Cymbidium. The hybrid Cymbidiums we're talking about are a cooler climate orchid. There are Cymbidiums that you can grow in the tropics, and there are species Cymbidiums from the tropics, and there are lots of hybrids now that are being created for people who live in warmer climates. So you can still grow Cymbidiums if you're lucky enough to live in somewhere balmy. But here in Melbourne, I can grow these outdoors all year. So a bit of context about my weather. Now, Australia doesn't have the same zone systems as the US, and it's not really of any use here in Australia. Our weather is really conditioned about heat and rainfall, not coldness. But, so saying, a very broad arrow is that we're roughly a zone 9, but that is also the same as the lovely Rachel at Gardening Duensa in Southern Ireland, so go figure, two quite different places. The essence is that our winters here in Melbourne can get quite cold, but they don't freeze. So they rarely go below 0 degrees centigrade or 32 Fahrenheit. And here in the city, we very rarely, if ever, get frost. Certainly in the outer parts of the city you can, different kettle of fish. Where I am though, cold, wet winters that don't freeze, and we can have hot and dry summers, but it can also rain in summer. So our climate is often described as either a wet Mediterranean or warm temperate. But what it means is Cymbidiums for me can stay outside all year, which all of these do. So they are under dappled light from trees. They get a little bit of stronger light in winter because the trees are deciduous, and this is what they love. They need the cold differentiation of seasonal weather in winter to stimulate the flower spikes. And depending where you are in the country, they will bloom at various points from mid to late winter to early spring. Which brings us to the point of, when do you repot your Cymbidium? So if we say spring is the time to repot your Cymbidium, that is true, but it is spring right now, and I've got 3 plants here doing very different things. So I thought it might be good just to observe those before we go any further. So first thing is, what should your plant be doing in relation to repotting it? And the easiest signal is flowering. Now, as you can see here, this is a compact Cymbidium, and it's one of those compact pendulous sorts of flowers, and it's a Sarah Jean, and I think it's Ice Cascade, but I think a possum stole the tag, so I'm not 100% sure. Now, as you can see, it is early spring now, and that flower spike is still very much in evidence. You can see that a few of the older flowers are starting to die off, so this spike probably only has a couple more weeks, but nonetheless, this plant is still very much in flower, and so although it is spring, and if this plant needed to be repotted, I wouldn't be doing it just yet until that flower spike has completely died. But what we can see on this plant, and I will come in and show you closer, the beginnings of the new spring growth growing here. So should this have needed to be repotted, not a bad time, but we would just wait for this flower spike to die. All right, let's move this aside, the fabulous flowering Cymbidium, and then let's look at this one. Now, as you can see here, that, ladies and gentlemen, is a flower spike which is not even remotely close to opening. So it is spring, and in fact, it is spring. But this plant is only really just beginning its flower spurt. So that flower is probably not going to open for another couple of weeks and then last for quite a long time. As we know, Cymbidium flowers last a long time. So should this orchid have needed a repot, I would have to wait and wait and wait until this flower is done, which could well be the end of spring because that bloom is a long way off opening. So although the whole repot in spring thing is kind of a rule, it really does depend what your plant is doing. So you kind of read the signs. This one is still about to bloom, not a good time to repot. This orchid, plant lovers, has quite a story, and when that flower comes out, I will make a video about it because this is a story of survival. Okay, so that then means, when is your orchid ready to repot? And here we have one that is. Now, first thing, as you can see, it's a large specimen. Now, the first question is also really, does your plant actually need to be repotted? Now, Cymbidiums like to be quite pot bound. They want to be enclosed. So all of their species ancestors are epiphytes, but they're the sort of epiphytes that lived in sort of mounds of detritus in the forks of trees and in the base of trees and sort of root nooks, etc. So quite contained spaces, but with material in it. So not like, let's say, a Phalaenopsis, which is also an epiphyte, but that clings to the side of a tree with no material around its roots, whereas Cymbidiums really do. So they like to be essentially pot bound, and the decision to repot a Cymbidium is really when it literally is bursting at the seams and there is no room for the new growth to come and form a pseudobulb. So it is really cramped in the pot. That is the time to repot it, and the season to do it is spring, and you wait until the flowers are dead. So this one has bloomed for me, as you can see there. The flower spikes are all dead. So the first thing we're going to do is cut those off, but this is essentially a plant that is ready. Now, we've got dead flower spikes, and I'll come in and show you closely, but we've also got our new growths here, which are putting on their spurt, and there is 1, 2, 3. Well, I can see at least 3 new growths, and they're quite a good size. They are probably, what, 7 centimeters, which is what, about 4 inches. So they're quite a good size. So this is the perfect time. Now, I would have to say that this doesn't actually need to be repotting. I'll come and show you. There is still quite a bit of space in the pot itself. But this is a plant that I got off Facebook Marketplace, and I did actually show you it in bloom in a video, which I'll link above and below. And it's in a big plastic pot. You know my feelings about big plastic pots. And Cymbidiums are really sort of decorative show plants because I often put them by the front door so you can see it, and I just don't find plastic attractive. So I want to put it in a more attractive terracotta pot. So here's the thing though, I'm repotting this and it doesn't really need it. So I'm not going to go up a pot size. If the plant was really cramming at the seams to break out, you would go up a pot size, but not a huge amount, just sort of like an inch or a couple of centimeters. So you don't want to overpot Cymbidiums. And the other risk about repotting a Cymbidium is it could sulk the following cycle and not bloom for you. So there is always that risk. But anyway, I am prepared to try it with this orchid. All right, so the first task is to remove all the stakes and the clips, and in fact this is some odd old shoelace. So let's remove those. Let's take out these canes. Take out the canes like thus. Take off the clips. Take out the canes. Take off that one. Okay, there we are. Caneless and naked plant. Next thing with your sterilized secateurs is trace the old flower spike as far down as you can get and cut it as close to the base as you can, and I'll come in and show you closer. There we go. Snip. So without damaging this new spike that's here, we're going to follow this down and just get down as close as we can to the base and just take that out. And in fact, what I can see now is that there are two growths down there. So there we are. Anyway, and then we're just going to take out this last one down as close as we can get without damaging anything. There we go. Spike removed. Okay, there we are. There is our flower spikes removed. And as you can see, they are really quite brown and beige. They're already dying. This one is perhaps still the greenest, but nonetheless, those flowers are very dead, so it's not a problem to have cut that even though the base of that spike is still green. It's really not going to be doing much. Okay, let us move aside our dead spikes. And then let us look at the plant itself. Okay, so as I said, in an ideal world, this actually doesn't need repotting because it still has plenty of room in the pot. There's another few years of growth, but I just want a more attractive pot. So what are we going to need? A pot. So here is my terracotta pot. It's about the same size as the pot that the plant is in. So we'll just see what's going to happen when we unpot it to see if I could actually go down a little bit more. Secateurs, there might be some dead roots that we need to trim off. And I have got a pile of crocks, which are old broken terracotta pots, to put into the pot for drainage. We have got mycorrhizal fungi. As you all know, I'm sure by now, I live for mycorrhizal fungi, and mycorrhizal fungi has a symbiotic relationship with the roots of any plant, every plant actually, and it assists the plant draw out nutrients from the soil, the medium that it is in. So very important, all soil will have mycorrhizal, but it doesn't hurt to put a little bit extra in, and we have got a generic slow release fertilizer, which I'm going to mix in with the potting mix. In spring, I'll also be putting a topical dressing on, but as we are repotting this one in spring, I am not putting a topical dressing of the slow release fertilizer with this. I'm just going to put it in the mix as we repot the plant. Lastly, and most importantly, what's the medium, Matthew? Well, plant lovers, ta-da! It is out of the bag orchid mix. Now, I did make a film about what do you repot things in and what are the choices, which I will link above and below. But for me, in my climate, out of the bag orchid mix is perfect for Cymbidium. So it's quite loose, but it's still a little grainy. So it's actually really good for aroids, that sort of plant. And I use out of the bag orchid mix for aroids as well as Cymbidiums. Now, if you don't have a good source of out of the bag orchid mix near you, you could use large bark mixed with perlite and charcoal. So you have quite a loose aerated medium, but plenty of opportunity for the plant to get its roots through. I just find that this is cheaper and it does the trick. And honestly, Cymbidiums are not that fussy when it comes to their potting, I find, as long, of course, as it's not too compressed. So don't use regular potting mix because that is going to be too tight and too compressed around the roots. Remember, it is an epiphyte, so it is used to quite an airy root environment, but nonetheless quite a tight one. So this is what I am going to use. Okay, first thing is we have our large pot, and then we just put all of our crocks of old terracotta in the bottom, and all this does is simply improve the drainage of the pot. So what Cymbidiums do not like is soggy roots. And we'll just put in some medium just to give the roots something to settle in. There we go. And I'll just show you what the consistency of this is like. So you can see it's bark, but it's also a little bit soily. So it is quite loose, but it's not as loose as plain bark would be. There we go. And then what I'm going to put into there is our slow release fertilizer. and a little bit more because it's quite a large size plant. And then our mycorrhizal fungi. There we go, just a little dash, kind of as much as you'd put cayenne pepper into a dish. Next thing is to unpot our plant. And let's see what's going on here. Swap those over. So you can actually see here quite clearly, this is where the plant sort of originated and it's grown out. So it's grown in this direction and this part of the pot is still quite empty. So when I'm repotting it, I will probably pot this part of the plant a little bit closer towards the edge, I think. Anyway, let's give it a squeeze and see if we can get this baby out. And what I don't want to do is, of course, damage any of the new growths. It's kind of easy to grab onto some of these old dead back bulbs to pull it out. There we go. Ta-da! There is our revealed plant. Now, first observations, I'm just going to take some of this off. There we go, just loosen off some of this old material. So you see there's still plenty of room. This really wasn't pot bound, so I am being quite naughty in repotting it. And so for me, this is really just about aesthetics, not need. You really don't need to repot Cymbidiums until they are really, really climbing out of their pot. Anyway, let's clean off all this. We can see the beautiful new growths coming out here. Healthy root system. There's nothing untoward in there that is cause for alarm. A few of the older roots are a bit rotten, but that's not a problem. Like this one here, which we will snip off. There we are. Now here we can see there is a new growth that I hadn't spotted, and then there's two here. So this plant is really healthy and it is very, very lustful of life, I feel. Look at that. All right, well, I'm not going to go too crazy because there's really no need to. So we've got a lot of that loosish material out. It is reasonably compacted in there, but that's okay. It's not in bad condition. It's not smelly. It's not decomposing particularly. So there we are, getting that all out. Now, the other thing you might want to do is actually get rid of any of the old back bulbs. But you know, with this one, if I were to get rid of any of these back bulbs, it would actually mean dividing the plant, and I really don't want to do that. So they're a little aesthetically unappealing, but essentially not doing any harm. So I am going to leave these two old back bulbs because I could divide this, but I don't want to. I want to have a glorious big specimen. Well, there we are. There is our plant as cleaned off as is kind of possible. I don't need to go crazy. There's really no need. The medium isn't in bad condition. So there we go. I am now going to plop this in the new pot. And let us place our plant. And you know what? I don't think I'm going to have a huge amount of choice about how the plant is positioned. Oh, yes, I am. So there are new growths coming out here and here and here. So, it's pretty multi-directional, I'll have to say, but I still think this part is probably what I'm going to move closest to the back. And now I'm just going to backfill and fill up the gaps. There we are, giving it a tap to get it all to settle in. So remember, we've already got our fertilizer in there and our mycorrhizal fungi in there. Tap, tap, tap. Okay, there we are. And I guess the other important thing is just to observe that you want to keep the height of the plant at basically the same height as it was in the previous pot. So don't bury it too deeply or don't expose it too much. You kind of want to keep the soil level at roughly the same spot as it was. And that, ladies and gentlemen plant lovers, is a perfect fit. So there we are, plant lovers. One repotted Cymbidium. We have answered the eternal question, when do you repot a Cymbidium and how do you repot a Cymbidium? So this is now beautifully tapped in. It's in basically roughly the same size pot. What I'm going to do now is water it in with a sea salt liquid seaweed solution. So I'll dilute this to about 1/8 of what is recommended on the bottle. And that is a tonic, not a fertilizer. And you could also use worm juice, for example, from your worm farm. And that's just, it's like giving a little cocktail after the stress of its rebirthing. So I'm now going to put this outside with all my other Cymbidiums where it gets dappled light. They're under a row of silver birch trees. If you watched my grow space video, which I will link above and below, it's outside so it gets dappled light, a little stronger light in winter, perfect. And all my Cymbidiums quite happy there and bloom very well. It is protected from rain, but it does get all the winter nighttime minimums. So I do control the watering of these. But so saying, I have seen Cymbidiums in pots in people's gardens in Melbourne, which are completely exposed to the weather. So as long as the medium is free draining and perhaps the pot is elevated, so it's going to drain really well and not sit in a soggy area, because Cymbidiums do not like soggy roots. Who does? You'll be fine. So there you are. If your climate's like mine and it's spring in the southern hemisphere, then it is time to repot your Cymbidium if the flowering is finished and if you have new growth and if it actually needs it, which means that it's really, really, really pot bound and there's no more room for the plant to grow. As I said, I've cheated somewhat for this purely on aesthetic reasons, but we've all benefited from it, as have you. The flowers of this are amazing. I am hopeful that I haven't annoyed it so much that it's going to sulk next year and will hopefully still bloom for me. So there's plenty of new growths on this plant. So these take a 12-month cycle to mature, and then those bulbs are going to be producing flower spikes for us next winter to bloom in late winter, early spring. So I cannot wait to show you that. But in the meantime, plant lovers, if you have loved this, do hit subscribe and the notification bell if you want to hear of my exact adventures when they befall, which is every Friday. I post once a week. So thank you very much for watching. Thanks for finding me. Thanks for subscribing. And this lovely no name, no ID Cymbidium hybrid and I wish you farewell until next week. Take care wherever you are.